Alright, so with Age of Overlord approaching very quickly, all of us are deciding what to run in the next format. So I figured we will have like a chill discussion about diverse versus tier 0. I think that's always a cool thing to talk about, and I would really want to hear all of you guys' thoughts, which you can leave in the comments down below. Also like the video if you like me doing these types of stuff where we just pretty much discuss what's going on in the game. And turning our attention to the diverse format first, there's so many decks that you can play, obviously. And a lot of them are also going to be sort of on a similar power level because of either engine or non-engine, however they kind of act in the metagame. Some of them can actually counter some of the top decks and therefore are good. The actual top decks aren't that overpowered, so then a lot of other like rogue-ish decks can sort of like rise in popularity and actually become strong. The format is pretty much like evenly spread, so you can top with almost any deck that you pick up. And a lot of players really love this, and to them, this makes for a healthy game because they can play a deck that they actually enjoy and they can take it to an event, which is not going to be the case in a tier 0 format. It's kind of like, when you think about the Yu-Gi-Oh game, the competitive game is like the majority of players, right? We all lean to the tournaments. We go to the tourneys. Like, we want to do well. If you want to play casually, you can play at home and you can play any type of format, or you can play any type of matchup, ban list, whatever you want to do. So at the end of the day, the actual metagame or game in general shouldn't really affect the players that play some kind of Time Wizard format at home, if you know what I'm talking about. So if you focus on the majority, which is the competitive player base, there's actually a couple downsides when you think about a diverse format. And from what I've seen, a lot of competitive players just really dislike those types of formats because of the downsides we're going to be discussing. And it's mainly just the fact that it's so hard to prepare for an actual event. It's kind of like, you need to think about literally like 10 decks that are like at the top of the meta, and then like 20 or even 30 other decks that can just catch you off guard at like a random round. If you go to a YCS or something and you lose a couple of the early ones, I mean, you might even drop at that point if you feel like you're not gonna make it, but let's say you continue, and at the point of losing that one match, maybe, when you get to like the roguish side of things, it is insanely hard to do well from that point, because then you would need to counter a myriad of other decks. It's kind of like the preparation is just horrible. And what you would need to do is just go about it very systematically, like actually go through it, like make a list or like really test it out, like make a chart or something where you determine which cards you need, and then you sort of like can decipher which deck would be the best choice. But who actually is willing to go through that? If like there is a competitive person, obviously they're gonna want to do well, and they might go through all of this hard work and preparation, but it is very tough. So immediately it's not as enjoyable to the actual majority of the player base, and I feel like that's something we need to think about. There's also just the mentality of, you know, players enjoying the deck that they're playing and actually being really proud of themselves of doing well with their pad deck. It's kind of like, sometimes it feels more rewarding to win in a diverse meta. I could say the same for the tier 0 format actually as well, but like if you're winning in a meta when there's so many different decks, there is some skill involved as well, because you're gonna have to face all of them and your knowledge is going to come into play, as well as your actual decision making on the spot, which isn't that easy. But then there's also something else to think about, because a lot of times, and I'm not saying that the Yu-Gi-Oh game is based on luck, most definitely not. You can see it, like almost the same amount of people like always tops. We have like regular people that do well. So it's not just luck based, but sometimes you're gonna go to an event where it's just going to be very unlucky because you run into so many random matchups where there was nothing you could do because you just weren't prepared. Either you don't know the randomness deck ever, or you just don't have the side deck space like physically to counter so many different decks. So it is insanely tough because you would need to make decisions. I'm going to respect like 5 decks maybe, or something like that. This means consequentially I'm just going to take an L probably if I face any other deck, if there is like a weakness in my deck towards those other strategies. So it is actually kind of horrible if you really think about it. Like for someone just picking up a Vanquish Soul deck maybe in the next format, that's going to be great. Like the deck just feels like it's very well positioned and it's cool, right? And there's a ton of other decks that you can say the same about, but then there's someone that just like, you know, they would just love it if they could play one deck and then prepare for like maybe 3 or 4 and just know what they're up against. You have 2 things you can do pretty much. You can either play the deck that you feel like that you like determine is the best deck in this particular format, because of whatever reason. Like you can do all of the testing, or you can just sort of like have a feeling about it, because moving on to the next format, like Age of Overlord, I feel like Unchained, for example, is still going to be good just because it performed like consistently throughout this entire period ever since the support, and nothing is really lacking. There's just going to be new decks, you know, trickling into the meta. So you can pick that type of deck. But then we saw Dortmund, where Flunder and Monodium as well, like random stuff, actually was really, really good because people determined that the metagame is going to shift. And Flunder is like this perfect counter for Unchained, whereas Monodium can just shine because a lot of players cut hand traps. So, you know, sometimes you're just gonna get unlucky. You're gonna pair up against someone that made the correct meta call. And that's when the person with like Monodium or whatever can be really proud of themselves because they made that meta call. So yes, it can be healthy in some regards because you can play so many different decks. But let's think about Tier 0 for a second, because it gets so much hate. Yeah, it's unhealthy because no other deck can play and like there's no diversity. You always encounter this one deck. But again, what is the tournament consisting of? It's consisting of competitive people. And if you give the same deck, almost the same build sometimes at like a very severe Tier 0 format to every single person, that's when the skill is really going to shine. A lot of times there's going to be like an unfair advantage, but let's think about Tier Element format for a second. Everybody said that Dweller was like the win condition, but it really wasn't. We saw the amazing match between Hani and Jessie, and just a lot of times Dweller really wasn't the most terrible thing that could happen to you. I think Tier 0 format is really going to depend on the type of deck that's actually the one that's Tier 0, if that makes sense. Like Spiral Tier 0 was kind of painful, but Tier Elements Tier 0 is really just a showcase of skill and a lot of interaction. And let's talk about this word for a second. I feel like what actually makes a format healthy is the amount of interaction that you actually have with your opponent when you're playing. We saw a ton of diversity a couple years back at Nationals, but every single of the decks played like Artifact Scythe or like some type of lock. And it was actually a lame experience to play in that type of format. So, okay, let's continue with Tier 0. You're trying to prepare for this one strategy. So you're gonna practice a ton and you're gonna theorize and you're gonna do everything, but you know what you're preparing for. So that's when technical play and stuff like that can actually like matter, because you just need to build your deck and then you can really practice the actual matchups that you know you're gonna face. Like you're not gonna realistically go test like 30 different matchups. I mean, you can. You most definitely can. But okay, let's think about the diverse format for another second. I just realized I haven't talked about something else. So a lot of times people actually really enjoy theory and deck building, which means that in a diverse format, it just kind of means a lot to them that they get to do that. And I understand that completely, but I'm still not entirely certain if that actually makes for a healthy game. So now that we discussed all of that, and I would really want to hear all of your thoughts as well. But I'm not certain if we actually determine that either of these formats is more healthy. A lot of times with Tier 0, you're preventing some other strategies from existing, which is unhealthy. You know, that's just a fact. But with a diverse format, you're sort of putting too much RNG in the meta, which I also think is not okay. So I'm not certain if we determine that either of these formats is actually more healthy than the other, or if they're healthy, period. But I do sort of have like a middle ground, like a middle road we can take that in my opinion would make for the healthiest type of format. And again, we're gonna turn back to toss format. But it's not just toss format, you know, it's just a lot of people just really like it. It's basically a format where you know what you're preparing for, but it's only a couple decks, because we all know that in toss format we had our own issues, like Engage at 3, Orca's just stuff and Colossus and all of that. It wasn't perfect, but it never really is if you think about it. So I think that the best type of format is the one where there's only a couple decks, like maybe 3 to 4 decks that really shine in the meta, that are more powerful, that have larger representation, and that you know you're going to prepare to play against. And then there's only a couple decks, maybe one that's like the perfect anti-meta strategy, but that type of format I feel like is the healthiest. And I'm not entirely certain we're going in a very healthy direction with what's going on now. Age of Overlord really is going to change a lot of things. It's giving support to many decks, so we're gonna have more decks in the meta. And I don't know, I think it's gonna be wild. So let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you agree with my sort of conclusion. And yeah, let me know what you're playing in the next format. I would really love to know. Like the video, make sure you are subbed, ding the bell, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.